Under the blistering late afternoon sun, a black woman in plain clothes is yanked from her car by two white officers at a roadside checkpoint. They shout in her face, clamp the cuffs so tight that blood trails down her wrist, and expect her to break. But she doesn't scream, doesn't plead, she simply looks up at them, calm and unshaken. Before you continue, ask yourselves if you're prepared for what comes next. No one realizes, they've just arrested the worst possible person. General Naomi Carter carried her authority the way a steel blade carries its edge, silent, controlled, and devastating when necessary. At 54, she was one of only a handful of black women to ever reach the rank of 4-star general in the United States Marine Corps. Those who served under her spoke of her discipline with reverence, those who tried to undermine her learned quickly that calm did not mean weakness. Naomi was a strategist by nature, patient, analytical, always 3 moves ahead. But today, she wore none of the symbols that defined her status. No uniform. No medals. No insignia announcing her rank to the world. Instead, she wore a simple button-down shirt, dark jeans, and running shoes, clothes chosen specifically to make her indistinguishable from any other middle-aged woman driving home after work. Her only remarkable possession was the matte black military wristwatch strapped tight to her arm, a device capable of recording encrypted video, audio, GPS data, and biometric readings. It looked ordinary. It wasn't. For months, Naomi had been quietly collecting complaints from residents of Westcrest, a predominantly black neighborhood in Ridgeview. They described the same ritual, an aggressive checkpoint positioned at the border of their community, operated under the guise of public safety, but in reality used to intimidate, harass, and drive residents out. Behind it all stood Councilman Leonard Briggs, a man whose polished speeches couldn't mask his hunger to reshape Ridgeview's demographics to please wealthy developers. Naomi had been asked by the Pentagon to review civil rights violations affecting service members across the country, but what she found in Ridgeview concerned her even more. The checkpoint wasn't just unlawful, it was strategic. It was designed to target the people least able to fight back. So she designed an operation of her own. No escorts. No staff. No identification. She would drive through the checkpoint alone, a black woman in an aging SUV, and observe what happened when officers believed no one was watching. It wasn't a trap. She wasn't here to provoke. She simply wanted the truth, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. Her meeting at the Pentagon earlier that day had lasted 4 hours, filled with discussions about oversight, accountability, and how systemic bias corrodes institutions from within. As she drove down the stretch of highway toward Ridgeview, sunlight glare flickering across her windshield, she replayed those conversations in her mind. Change required evidence. Evidence required exposure. As Naomi approached the checkpoint, cones narrowing the lanes and 2 patrol cars angled to funnel traffic, she tightened her fingers on the steering wheel. She didn't know yet that the moment she stopped her car, she would no longer be observing injustice, she would be dragged into the center of it. And by sunrise, so would the entire country. Captain Ross Wallace had the posture of a man who believed the entire stretch of asphalt belonged to him. At 43, he carried his authority like a weapon, always cocked, always loaded. His reputation preceded him across Ridgeview, a temper sharpened by years of unchecked power, and a bias so deeply rooted it had become part of his vocabulary. Standing beside him was Officer Jake Rowan, 26, still green enough to believe Wallace's version of policing was the standard to aspire to. Wallace watched Naomi's SUV roll to a stop and didn't even pretend to scan for violations. He'd already made up his mind. The moment he saw a black woman behind the wheel of an older vehicle, wearing simple clothes and no obvious signs of status, he decided she didn't belong in Ridgeview North. He stomped to her window and slammed his knuckles against the glass hard enough to make bystanders flinch. License. Registration, he barked. No questions. Naomi lowered her window calmly. "I'd like to know the legal basis for this stop, officer." The temperature seemed to rise 10 degrees. Wallace leaned in, nostrils flaring. "You people always think you know the law." Behind him, Rowan stiffened, following his lead despite the discomfort flickering across his face. "Step out," Wallace ordered. "Now." Naomi complied without hesitation. Her movements were slow, deliberate, offering no resistance whatsoever. But Wallace didn't want compliance, he wanted dominance. The moment she cleared the door, Rowan rushed in, twisting her wrists and snapping the cuffs so tight Naomi winced involuntarily. The metal bit into her skin, drawing a thin line of blood. Wallace saw it. He looked right at it. And he smiled. "Look at that," he said loudly. "Already getting an attitude." Naomi stood motionless, steadying her breath. The sun beat mercilessly on the pavement, turning it into a skillet of blistering heat. Then Wallace barked the order that made several onlookers gasp. "Kneel." On the ground. Naomi didn't move. "There is no lawful." On the ground, Wallace snapped. "Maybe this will teach you some respect." Rowan hesitated. "Captain, she's..." "Do it." Wallace roared. And so Naomi lowered herself onto the burning pavement. The moment her knees made contact, fire shot up her legs. Her skin instantly prickled and throbbed. But she made no sound. Around them, people began pulling out their phones. One young man shouted, "She didn't do anything. She's complying." "What's wrong with you?" Wallace snapped toward him. "Say one more word, and you're under arrest for obstruction." Fear rippled through the crowd, but so did outrage. Naomi's voice, when it came, was controlled and chillingly precise. "You're violating constitutional rights." Wallace laughed, a short, cruel sound. "I decide what's constitutional here." No one noticed the subtle shift of Naomi's wrist as her hand twitched within the cuff. No one saw the faint blinking icon on her watch face, an encrypted military recording system silently capturing everything: audio, video, GPS coordinates, timestamps, even her rising heart rate as the heat seared into her knees. Wallace believed this moment proved his control. He believed he was teaching another lesson, the kind he delivered dozens of times without consequence. What he didn't know was that he had just stepped into the most meticulously documented trap of his career. Because Naomi Carter wasn't simply a woman kneeling in the street. She was the highest-ranking black female officer in the United States Marine Corps. And this time, the evidence wouldn't disappear. It was already being sent to the Pentagon. What began as a few phones quietly raised toward the checkpoint turned into a digital eruption. Within minutes, clips of Naomi kneeling on the boiling pavement spread across Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram Live. Anger poured through the comments as fast as the footage uploaded. "She's peaceful. Why is she cuffed? This is racial profiling. Save the footage, don't let them delete it." Wallace noticed the phones and mistook the attention for validation. He strutted directly into the live stream frame, hands on his vest, chin raised as if he were delivering a press conference. "She resisted," he announced with theatrical authority. "She was hostile. She tried to flee." The crowd murmured in disbelief. The live stream chat exploded with outrage and disbelief. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't look at Wallace. She didn't protest or argue. Instead, she watched, silently, sharply, collecting every word, every action, with a calmness that only unnerved him further. Rowan shifted uneasily. "Captain, she didn't." "Shut up and learn," Wallace snapped, loud enough for nearby phones to capture every syllable. A middle-aged white woman stepped forward, shaking with anger. "This is unlawful. She hasn't done anything." Wallace spun around and jabbed a finger toward her. "Say one more word and I'll take you in too." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. People instinctively stepped back, but the phone stayed up. Naomi lifted her head slightly. "I request a supervisor," she said, her voice steady despite the burning asphalt searing into her knees. Wallace barked, "Denied. You don't request anything." Then, without warning, he yanked her to her feet. The force jerked her wrists painfully against the cuffs, reopening the cuts. A bystander zoomed in on the fresh blood, the image instantly broadcast to thousands watching online. Wallace shoved her toward her SUV. "Search the vehicle," he ordered Rowan, though there was no warrant, no probable cause, no justification at all. Rowan hesitated. "Captain, we can't." "I said search it." The young officer obeyed. With shaking hands, he opened the doors and began rifling through Naomi's belongings. Wallace joined in, tossing items aside, her jacket, a water bottle, a stack of neatly organized papers. He dumped her purse onto the ground, scattering everything across the asphalt. Lip balm rolled under a tire. A family photo fluttered toward the curb. The audience watching online saw everything. "This is illegal. He's destroying her stuff. Who is this woman? These cops are done." Wallace wasn't concerned. His confidence didn't simply border on arrogance, it eclipsed it. Years of getting away with misconduct had taught him the same lesson over and over: people were afraid to fight back, afraid to file complaints, afraid to challenge the badge. He leaned close to Rowan, unaware that a nearby phone had captured every word. "Another one learning manners," he sneered. "She'll think twice next time." Naomi looked at him then, just for a second. Her gaze was cool, almost pitying. Wallace interpreted it as defiance. He had no idea. Because the woman he believed he was breaking was one of only 6 individuals in the entire U.S. military with the authority to initiate an immediate federal investigation into civil rights violations. And at that moment, unnoticed beneath the metal cuff digging into her wrist, her watch continued transmitting encrypted footage to a secure Pentagon server. Wallace thought he was teaching her a lesson. He was, instead, documenting his own downfall. Inside the Ridgeview Police Department, the fluorescent lights hummed with the kind of cold indifference only a building accustomed to misconduct could possess. Naomi was escorted through the hallway, wrists still raw and bleeding beneath the cuffs. Rowan walked behind her, his expression torn, fear, guilt, and something like shame flickering across his features. He knew what had happened on that roadside was wrong. He knew it from the moment Wallace barked his first order. But he also knew what happened to officers who crossed their captain. Naomi was placed in a holding room with peeling paint and a metal bench bolted to the floor. Wallace strutted outside the bars like a warden from a bad movie, basking in his own arrogance. "Look at you now," he said, arms folded. "You think knowing a few laws makes you untouchable? Newsflash, you're in my house." Naomi didn't respond. Silence, for her, was not submission. It was strategy. After several minutes, Wallace returned with a mocking flourish. "You get one call," he announced. "So go ahead. Call your boyfriend. Tell him you mouthed off to the wrong cop." Naomi lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes with a stillness so sharp it made Rowan step back without understanding why. "I'll make the call I need," she said. Wallace shoved a landline phone toward her, smirking. But Naomi didn't reach for it. Instead, she raised her cuffed hands just enough for her thumb to tap the side of her military watch. A small, almost imperceptible light blinked. Then she spoke a 14-character code, crisp and precise. The watch vibrated once, and a voice, calm and authoritative, filled the room. General Carter, authentication confirmed. What is your status? The entire station froze. Wallace's smirk evaporated. Rowan's jaw dropped. An officer in the hallway dropped a stack of reports that scattered across the floor. The room felt suddenly too small, too bright, too dangerously silent. Naomi spoke evenly. Unauthorized detainment. Civil rights violation in progress. Dispatch investigative response. Affirmative, the voice replied. Military investigation unit en route. Estimated arrival, 38 minutes. Naomi lowered her hands. Thank you. Wallace stumbled backward. General. What are you? This is some kind of. But the tone in the Pentagon operator's voice left no room for argument. There was no prank, no misinterpretation. They had not arrested a mouthy civilian. They had arrested a 4-star Marine Corps general. And the Pentagon was now watching. Panic spread through the station like a chemical leak. 40 minutes later, the street outside the department transformed into the kind of scene Ridgeview officers had only seen on federal documentaries. 3 armored SUVs rolled up. 2 black sedans. A military convoy with investigators in full tactical gear. Department of Justice vehicles immediately behind them. Councilman Leonard Briggs arrived in the chaos, sweating through his suit. One look at Naomi, standing calmly between 2 federal agents, turned him ghost white. General Carter, the lead investigator, greeted, saluting. We have secured the premises. Wallace attempted to slip out a back exit but found 2 federal agents blocking the doorway. Captain Ross Wallace, one of them asked. Wallace almost fell trying to retreat. Naomi stepped forward. I have evidence to present. They entered the briefing room, where investigators gathered around a large table. Naomi placed her watch on the surface. A projector synchronized automatically. The screen filled with the first frame of roadside footage. Every second was recorded in 4K clarity. Wallace's voice dripping with contempt. His order to kneel. The illegal search. The threats. The blood from the 2 tight cuffs. And then came the internal evidence Naomi had compiled long before today. Charts showing disproportionate stops. Heat maps proving Westcrest was targeted at 6 times the rate of wealthier districts. Emails from Briggs discussing strategic pressure to encourage relocation. Encrypted audio clips of Wallace mocking residents, bragging about cleaning up the neighborhood. Finally, Detective Miguel Morales stepped forward, holding a folder thick with documents. I've been tracking internal misconduct for 5 months, he said quietly. I tried reporting up the chain, but the complaints disappeared. So I documented everything myself: illegal searches, doctored reports, coercion, quota-based arrests. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The room went still. Wallace snapped. You set me up, he roared, pointing at Naomi. You tricked me. You planned this. You. Naomi didn't flinch. No, she said softly. You exposed yourself. I just recorded it. The investigators exchanged grim looks. Briggs sank into a chair, trembling. Rowan stared at the floor, realizing just how deeply he'd fallen into the shadow of a man unworthy of his badge. For the first time since the checkpoint was erected, Ridgeview's abusive system stood face to face with accountability. And none of them could escape what came next. The federal hearing convened in a packed chamber, journalists shoulder to shoulder, civil rights attorneys lining the aisles, military representatives observing in stern silence. Wallace and Briggs sat at the defense table, both wearing expressions that wavered between defiance and barely concealed panic. Their attorney rose first, clearing his throat as if preparing to deliver a masterclass in fabricated justification. My clients acted according to protocol, he declared. The woman in question was disrespectful, uncooperative, and escalated the situation. Captain Wallace acted in the interest of public safety. Briggs leaned into his microphone. She refused orders. Her behavior was confrontational. The room bristled at his tone, but before anyone could speak, Naomi stood. She moved with deliberate calm, as if she had all the time in the world, and total control of it. Your Honor, she said softly, I have additional evidence. The judge nodded. Proceed, General Carter. Naomi tapped her military watch. Instantly, the courtroom screens flickered to life. The first frame of the roadside encounter appeared, crystal clear, stabilized, and so detailed that even the grain of the asphalt was visible. High-resolution audio carried Wallace's voice with perfect clarity. They watched. Wallace ordering her to kneel. Her knees hitting blistering pavement. His smirk while tightening the cuffs. Rowan's hesitation. Wallace shouting at bystanders. The illegal search of her car. The deliberate scattering of her belongings. His laughter as blood ran down her wrist. And the final blow, another one learning manners. Each clip was time-stamped, GPS verified, and unmistakably damning. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The judge leaned forward, jaw tight. One juror covered her mouth, tears pooling in her eyes. And still, Naomi wasn't finished. She changed the slide. Charts appeared, lines, bars, ratios, color-coded disparities impossible to misinterpret. Drivers from Westcrest, a predominantly black neighborhood, are stopped at a rate 6.5 times higher than drivers from Ridgeview North, Naomi stated. 91% of those searched had no probable cause. 78% report verbal degradation. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut with surgical precision. This is not random. It is structural, she said. It is intentional. Next came a series of internal emails, projected for all to see, Briggs referring to Westcrest residents as a problem population, Wallace discussing how increased arrests would accelerate property turnover, and several messages explicitly outlining pressure to clear out minority families. The room went silent, so silent it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Naomi turned toward the Federal Oversight Committee, her posture straight, her expression resolute. Abuse is not a mistake, she said. It is a habit. And habits reflect leadership. Wallace lurched forward, face blotchy red. I didn't know who she was, he shouted, as if it were a defense. Naomi finally allowed herself a small, cold smile, the kind that wasn't triumph, but revelation. Rights don't depend on who the victim is, she replied. A murmur swept through the courtroom, agreement, admiration, anger, relief. Every word she spoke felt like a stone landing in still water, sending impossible to ignore ripples outward. The committee dismissed the jury. 3 hours later, they returned with a united stance. The foreperson read the decision. We find overwhelming and unanimous evidence supporting federal prosecution on all counts. Applause broke out. People wept. Others bowed their heads in gratitude or disbelief. Federal agents stepped forward as Wallace slumped in his chair, defeated, while Briggs clutched the edge of the table like a drowning man. The tide had turned, completely, irrevocably. And everyone watching knew it. The verdict sent shockwaves through Ridgeview and far beyond. Within 72 hours, federal prosecutors filed charges against Captain Ross Wallace, Councilman Leonard Briggs, and 6 additional officers who had aided, ignored, or concealed the discriminatory checkpoint program. The press called it the largest civil rights indictment in the state's history. Wallace stood stone-faced as the sentence was read, 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, unlawful detainment, falsified reports, and systemic abuse under color of law. For the first time since his badge had been pinned to his chest, no one stepped in to shield him. Briggs fared no better. He was stripped of his office, banned from holding public positions for life, and ordered to pay $1.7 million in restitution for orchestrating a scheme designed to push minority communities out of Westcrest. His political career, once carefully manufactured, collapsed overnight. Federal oversight teams arrived within days. The notorious checkpoint was dismantled, signs removed, cones hauled away. The road reopened without the barricades that had terrorized residents for nearly 3 years. Investigators combed through dusty filing cabinets and corrupted databases, uncovering patterns of unlawful arrest stretching back nearly a decade. When the review concluded, more than 400 residents received formal notices. Their records were cleared. Their charges erased. Their names restored. Some cried. Some celebrated. Some simply stared at the letters, stunned. Through it all, Naomi did not stand behind podiums or pose for cameras. She did not give a victory speech. When reporters finally cornered her outside the federal courthouse, she offered only one sentence, quiet, steady, and devastating in its truth. Power is a test. Too many failed it. By evening, the line crowned national headlines. And for the first time in a long while, the country listened. When Naomi returned to base that night, the corridors felt quieter than usual, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing faintly as she walked. Her wristwatch still bore the faint scratches from the cuffs, a small but permanent reminder of what had unfolded. A young lieutenant approached her hesitantly. "Ma'am, why didn't you reveal who you were sooner?" Naomi paused, meeting his earnest eyes. "Because the system must protect everyone," she said, "not just generals." The simplicity of the answer struck him harder than any lecture could. By morning, news outlets across the country replayed her testimony and her single-sentence warning about power. The National Police Academy announced a new required course titled, "How Unchecked Authority Destroys Its Own Foundation." Civil rights groups hailed her actions as a blueprint for reform. Her story became more than a headline, it became a cautionary tale. Strength isn't shown by issuing orders, but by knowing when not to. And kneeling isn't always a sign of weakness, sometimes, it exposes who truly should kneel before the law.